Good morning, students. We have been discussing about the 14th and the 17th centuries. In the previous class, we had an idea of the major scientific inventions and the geographical discoveries that had taken place during this particular period. Apart from the scientific inventions and the geographical discoveries, this period also witnessed massive changes in terms of ideas of state, ideas of social philosophy, ideas of economy, etc. One of the main reasons for these changes to occur in this particular period has been two different distinctive movements. And both of them have been popular movements. One such movement is the Renaissance movement, and the next movement is the Reformation movement. The Renaissance and Reformation movements had a lot of telling impact on the polity, society, and economy of the 14th and 17th centuries in Europe, among all nations that were there in Europe. It changed the manners, it changed the morals, it changed the forms of government, and it also changed or brought about new cultural patterns. So at the outset, let us get some idea on what Renaissance is, and then we will see what Reformation is. And we will go to some slides and see what are the important slides connected to this particular period. First, we will try to have an understanding in simple words what Renaissance means. Renaissance means rebirth. Rebirth of what? Rebirth of the intellect of mankind. Man started thinking in a different way, breaking away from the ancient or the medieval conventional thinking. Here, when you say Renaissance, a French term which means rebirth, it is the rebirth of the way in which man started thinking. About what? About 2-3 dimensions which were conditioning his lifestyle. For example, his relations with God, his relationship with religion, his relationship with forms of government, his relationship with nature, his relationship with economic activities. So every aspect of human life had to be looked upon or was looked upon from a different prism. Why did this happen? This basically, when we are trying to understand why did it happen, we find different reasons for the emergence of the Renaissance movement between 14th and 17th centuries. The fall of Constantinople, as we had seen in the case of geographical discoveries and scientific inventions, had also some impact on the Renaissance movement. The Renaissance movement, as I'm trying to tell you, was exposed to some of the ideas from the East, and this compelled them to connect themselves with their ancient ideas, especially Latin, French, and German. Especially Latin. they started reviving their old classics and tried to understand how man was depicted or how man lived in consonance with nature in the ancient period, and with the progress of time, how he lost this connection with nature. So this period has been the period where you have major political ideas like, or rather politico-social ideas, I prefer using the word politico-social ideas like individualism and humanism emerging. We will go into what individualism and humanism is at a later point of time. But suffice to this particular point, the growth of individualism and humanism compelled a larger section of the people to understand basically their relation with nature, religion, and God, the idea of God. So the Renaissance movement was trying to establish or bring back this link by reviving the classical works of Latin, German, and France, etc. So when we are trying to look at it here, the word Renaissance can be explained as a systematic process where man is trying to find himself in relation to the form of government, to the activity, to the freedom that he is supposed to enjoy, his connection with religion, his connection with God, etc. So in the process of history, man had lost all these connections. So the fall of Constantinople compelled them to go back to the past and see how man was connected to these basic ideas. The Renaissance ended feudalism. Feudalism was a relationship which was trying to explain the relation between land, production, and the people who control land. So this feudal way of thinking had brought about certain kinds of ways of life where slavery was accepted as a way of life, where exploitation was accepted as a way of life, where the right to interpret religion and the right to interpret God was appropriated by certain sections of the European society, like the bishops, the clerks, etc. So feudalism became a way of life which was very exploitative, discriminatory, and redundant. So in these circumstances, you find between the 14th and 17th century, the two systems, the political system and the religious system, they go together and become more exploitative, become more exploitative. If you take in countries like France itself, you did not have free individuals. You had only the total percentage of free individuals in countries like France and Italy was limited to around between 5 to 10% appropriately. So the idea of man in relation to nature was completely lost. This had to be brought back. This had to be brought back. So people like Erasmus, Dante, Petrarch, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, all these leading philosophers, theologians, social scientists, economists, some of them were economists, started making an attempt to reinterpret. Like, for example, if you take in the case of Martin Luther went against the established Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so these are some of the aspects which we will try to examine when we are trying to discuss about Renaissance and Reformation. The two important movements which changed the outlook of Europe. The 14th and 17th centuries are very important in the history of Europe, not just because of one idea, but because of several ideas. Whether you're talking of geographical discoveries, or whether you're talking of scientific invasions, or whether you're talking of political philosophy, this period transformed the entire of European nations. And that is the reason when we are trying to understand modern European history, we take 14th and 17th centuries as the base point. And we can also take the fall of Constantinople in 1453 as a starting point. The fall of Constantinople compelled Europe to look at itself from a different prism. And that is what the leading intellectuals of this particular period had done. They went back to the classical works, tried to understand the civilization, tried to explain the civilization, tried to explain the various forces which act upon man, condition man, govern his life, dictate terms and conditions to his life. So this movement, both the movements, tried to dispel all this and make the individual more of a free individual rather than an individual who is fenced, who is conditioned, whose freedom is snatched away, who is controlled by the political systems, who is manipulated by the religious orders, and who is not able to enjoy the fruits of his labor. This was the nature of European feudalism in the 14th and 17th centuries, which had to be reorganized, restructured, new blood had to be pumped in, new ideas had to be pumped in, and explained to the people with regard to or in connection to their living conditions. I'll just show you some of the slides which are connected to the Renaissance period, and then we will see what actually happened during the time of Renaissance and Reformation period, that is basically 14th and 16th centuries onwards. The first map that I'm showing, or the first slide which I'm showing you, is the map which you can see the main European countries. Like you can see Scotland, you can see Denmark, you can see the Holy Roman Empire, you can see the Kingdom of Naples, you can see the Papal State, you can see Rome, you can see Spain, you can see Asia Minor. So all the countries in different colors were affected by the Renaissance movement. The next slide, which I am showing you, is Renaissance in Italy. If you just take Italy, you can divide into 3 geographical divisions: Northern Italy, Central Italy, and southern Italy. Apart from this, you can also see the islands of Corsica and the Kingdom of Sardinia. In the northern Italy, you can see the Duchy of Modena, the Duchy of Ferrara. So you can see the emergence of city-states in this particular period. In the Renaissance period, you can see the emergence of the city-states, where the cities which were becoming populous, where there was an increase of the population in these cities, started governing by themselves. So the idea of Italy, or the idea of France, or the idea of Austria, all these countries getting identified in terms of dynasties. Like, for example, if you take France, it was identified by Bourbons. If you take Italy, it was identified by the Hohenzollern. If you take by Austria, again, it was identified by a particular dynasty. Like if you take Britain, it was identified by Tsar. So the identification of a nation was in relation to the dynasty, but not in relation to the people. So the emergence of city-state gives birth to the idea of nation, which eventually gives birth to the idea of nationalism. Italy was one of the primary states, city-states, where you have the development of the city-states, and one of the primary nations which contributed for the growth of Renaissance in this particular period in the three different parts of Italy, that is northern, central, and southern Italy. The next slide I am going to show you is again the map of Italy. Here you can see certain regions, like for example, if you take Florence, Florence art had developed. In this connection, I would like to tell you one thing. The medium through which the Renaissance movement was spreading in this particular period was in different forms. It was with the help of music, it was with the help of painting, it was with the help of poetry, with the help of dance and other finer aspects of man, that you find the Renaissance movement started spreading from Italy and then gradually to the rest of Europe. The three regions which become very important when we are trying to understand Renaissance movement are Italy, France, and Germany. These three nations contributed a lot for the spread of Renaissance movement and the spread of political ideas, economic philosophy, and social systems for the rest of the Europe. When you come down to the 18th and 19th centuries, there is a saying also had developed: what happens in France today will happen in Europe tomorrow. So these three nations have been a kind of trendsetters for the Renaissance movement. So you can see the Italian city-states. In this slide, you can see the Italian city-states where you have the Duchy of Savoy, the Duchy of Milan, Venice, Genoa, Modena, all this, or even papal states have become city-states. So this was a major change. This gives birth to the idea of a nation, moving away from identifying a nation with a dynasty to identifying a nation with the people, the people's culture, the people's living styles, and the people's forms of art, architecture, etc. So this was a major development between the 14th and 17th centuries in Europe. The next slide is showing you the Holy Roman Empire and the smaller states. Europe, after the end of the 100 Years' War that went on, between the European nations, you also have the fall of the Holy Roman Empire. The fall of the Holy Roman Empire had a telling impact on the idea of Christendom and the idea of the togetherness of the Christian countries, where you have a temporal head, and the temporal head, all the kingdoms are ruled on behalf of the temporal head. So the fall of the Holy Roman Empire, the breaking away of the idea of Christendom, the emergence of various regional church and church orders all over Europe contributed to a massive change in the way Europe started thinking in this particular period. It started thinking in a different way. And that is the reason we can say that this was a period of intellectual quickening. Man started thinking very fastly about economy, about politics, about political systems, about forms of government, about values, about morals, about cultures. So in every aspect, about science, scientific inventions, about land, about geographical discoveries. So every aspect to which he was connected, he started thinking very fastly. And as a result of this Renaissance and Reformation movement, independent of the political changes that have come about in Europe, we can say that they contributed a lot for the end of feudalism in Europe. The end of feudalism and the birth of capitalism itself is a significant change in the way the people started thinking in Europe. So, with the end of feudalism, there was a desire for classical learning. Who was a Renaissance man? Or who was a Renaissance woman? A man who was trying to break away from his feudal ideas, getting connected to, I don't say modern ideas here, getting connected to the classical learning of the story of civilization, where he is trying to give dignity to man, where he is trying to understand humanism, where he is trying to understand the need to break away from the medieval line of thinking, where he is trying to say that religion is different and form of government is different, and religion is private and personal, not official. So these are all the ideas that are going along with the idea of a Renaissance man or a woman. You are trying to change your ideas with a understanding of the classical learning, where you are trying to become more wise. This is a period where you can say that this was the period where wisdom was dawning, where learning was connected to your relationship with the forces which govern you, whether it was religion or state or an academic system. It could be anything which was conditioning your way of life. So all this led to a transformation of a collective thinking process, which leads to humanism. Individualism, when we are trying to talk about individualism, we are talking of an individual in his relation. When we are talking of humanism, we are talking of a group in relation. So the humanistic approach, with emphasis on morals, values, principles, the need for change, the need for recognizing individual as an individual, all these ideas get into the idea of humanism, where you recognize the other human being, not as a slave, but as an individual with dignity. This led to the humanistic approach, and this led to the study of humanities. Study of history became important. Study of economics became important. Study of political systems became important. And the study of all this became important with a knowledge of the study of ancient civilizations. With a knowledge of the study of ancient civilizations. So you can, I'm just showing you this map, holding it for some time, because all this was going on in Europe between the 14th and the 17th centuries. And this is what we call the rebirth. The rebirth of the intellect of man. The rebirth of the study of the story of civilization in relation to principles, values, morals, etc. The study of contemporary times, where all social, economic, and political institutions were being considered as a historical, haphazard historical outgrowth, which were devoid of any kind of reasoning and logic. So the Renaissance movement had put a lot of stress, or the leading giants of the Renaissance movement had put a lot of stress, had given a lot of importance in trying to understand man in relation to the forces which govern him. And they contributed for the growth of a new modern Europe. It is generally said that the Renaissance movement led to the Reformation movement, and the Reformation movement led to the French Revolution. When we are trying to understand the history of modern Europe, let us not compartmentalize the movements. Let us try to look at the connectivity of these movements. The connectivity of these movements is the strong ideas with which these movements have developed. While the Renaissance movement had developed within the society and was trying to transform social values, principles, and society at large, the Reformation movement was a movement which had come within the church and was trying to challenge the abuses of the church, the evil practices that had gone into the church, and free and cleanse the church, its order, practices, and the practice of Christianity as in such. So these two movements, which have come up in the 14th and 15th century, have spread to most of Europe, were trying to bring about a change in the social order, a change in the religious order. So historically, these movements are very important. To mention a few, people like Niccolo Conti, Machiavelli, Copernicus, Beccenio, Govenico Beccenio. He was the author of humanism. Okay, all these leading giants, Niccolo Conti, Machiavelli, Copernicus, and Beccenio Givano. These four personalities have been the leading personalities of the Renaissance movement, who contributed to look at the social life, the political life, and the economic life from a different prism. The next slide that I am going to show you is again a slide of city-states. This is a slide which is connected to that particular period. The earlier slide which I had shown you is a modern drawing, but this is a map which was made almost during that particular period. That's the difference between both the maps. And the next map I'm showing you is a map where you can see some of the Italian, it's a portrait of, a photo of the Renaissance period, where you can see deliberations going on among the intellectuals about some kind of discussions going on about the society, polity, economy, etc. So there were heavy debates which went on during this particular period with connection to the society, economy, and polity. I have shown you this slide for you to have an understanding. And then the next slide that I'm showing you is again the Italian Renaissance, the city of Italy, the city-state which has emerged in that particular period. And then the next slide which I'm showing you is Erasmus. Erasmus can be considered as both a Renaissance saint and a Reformation saint. You can see him burning away certain dictums of the church, putting them in the fire, and protesting against the church and its practices. So Erasmus can be considered as both a reformist saint and a Reformation saint. The influence of his ideas can be very clearly seen during the period of Renaissance and also during the period of Reformation. And here I'm again showing you a portrait of Erasmus. You can say he was the humanist hero of the Renaissance period. And this is the Reformation slide. I think so. This is Martin Luther discussing about the theological perceptions of Christianity with the rest of the people whom you can see in the photograph. And this is Martin Luther. Martin Luther was born on 10th November in the year 1483. Okay, and most of these Reformation saints, they were basically putting emphasis on breaking away from religious strictures and religious orthodoxy. Okay, whether it was you're talking of Martin Luther, whether you're talking of John Calvin, or whether you're talking of Zwingli, or whether you're talking of Erasmus and other reformist or Renaissance saints, they had put a lot of emphasis on the dignity of man, on the need to break away. They need to break away and free themselves from the strictures imposed by religion. They argued that the strictures that were being imposed on man were either by the religious system or the political system. So there is a need to break away. One example that I can give you of Martin Luther was that he challenged the sale of indulgence. Martin Luther challenged the sale of indulgence. You commit a crime, you violate the principles of natural law, then go to the church, pay an amount, feel guilty about it, your soul is redeemed of the sin. The sale of indulgence was very vehemently opposed by Martin Luther. So these are some of the strictures which religion was endorsing, the political systems were accepting, which were challenged by the Renaissance and the Reformation saints. So when these saints or leaders of the Renaissance movement were raising questions and the fall of Holy Roman Empire, the rise of city-states, all these factors led to the rise of nationalism, which led to ending the national monarchies. So these people like Martin Luther in Germany, and I'll show you a slide of, this is John Calvin. He questioned beliefs and predestination. predestination. Beliefs is the belief that is imposed in you, the belief that is inculcated in you, the belief to which you are connected are all the beliefs which are given to you by the society through some kind of a system, whether it can be a political system, whether it can be a religious system, whether it can be a social system, or it can be a combination of all this and the feudal nature of the period, which is making you believe something. So he questioned the belief system. He questioned the belief system, and he stressed on individualism. He tried to say that every man is potential. Not that some people were capable of doing certain things, the rest were supposed to follow. He tried to break away from this particular idea, and he had put a lot of stress on the potential of individualism. And he was a reformist who tried to change the Catholic Church. In fact, we can say, I'll go back to Martin Luther. We can say that Martin Luther was the first Protestant. Because of his 95 Theses, he becomes the first Protestant, and you have the domination of Roman Catholic Church coming to almost an end with the protest of Martin Luther, from where you can see various forms of Protestantism emerging. Christianity breaks completely into the Catholic order and the Protestant order. And probably we can say that Martin Luther was the first Protestant, and he becomes the father of the Protestant order. Okay, so similarly, you have John Calvin also protesting in France, giving a lot of importance to the potentiality of individual, who had gone against the corrupt practices in church, who also questioned wars between princes. This is something which needs to be explained. Wars between princes. If you I'll just take you to one map in the beginning, where you just see this map where you have the Holy Roman Empire, and you can see that there were different, you have Hungary, you have Poland, you have so many independent states. Even if you just take Italy, you have Naples, Kingdom of Sardinia, you have Corsica. So all these regions were under the control of the princes, and these princes were going to war. Again, this is another map which I'm showing you, where you can see Italy being divided into small independent kingdoms or states, which were having an impact on the kind of wars that were coming up in this particular period. Wars were having a telling impact on the economy of the particular period. So they were, just to satisfy the dynastic glory, the wars were a result of the fact that they had to satisfy the dynastic glory, like the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Hohenzollerns, the Tsars, the Tudors. So there was a need, they felt that there was a need to defend their dynastic history, and the wars were a resultant of such factors. So people like John Calvin had opposed this. And the wars had an impact. They tried to argue that the wars had an impact on the peace of the period and on the economy of the period. And the economy was coming from the people, so the wars had to be put an end. And in place of war, in place of this kind of dynastic kingdoms, there should be some kind of a democratic forms of government which should emerge in this particular period. Added to this, you also had some kind of a peasant movements in this particular period, where the peasants were unhappy with the kind of trade policies and the kind of agrarian policies that were being followed by these feudal lords. So all these factors were taken into consideration. And you have Martin Luther and John Calvin trying to make the people realize why such kind of situation was prevailing in Europe in that particular period. So the Reformation contributed for a change in the way the people started thinking about themselves in relation to the church. While the Renaissance movement compelled people to think about themselves in relation to society, the Reformation movement compelled people to think in relation to church. You also have Zwingli, another important another important philosopher who was from Switzerland, and he also had an impact. And here I can show you a painting of the life of Christ in medieval and Renaissance period in Italy. So these paintings were trying to, they were trying to impress upon the people that they should move away from strictures, they should move away from what you call break away from restrictions imposed by religious order, break away from orthodoxy, and contribute for a spirit of free inquiry, and live a life of imitating Christ. Okay, here you have the martyrdom of Margaret Pole, and these are some of the things. Again, you have a photograph or a portrait of Martin Luther with the 95 Theses in his hand. And here you have Erasmus, who was the author of Divine Comedy. So these are all some of the saints of the Renaissance period. I'm just showing you some of the works of the Renaissance period. See, here you have one book by Stephen, which speaks of Renaissance and self-fashioning, from More to Shakespeare. Okay, a very important book which gives a lot of information with regard to the social, political, and economic and cultural life of the Renaissance period, and the need for self-fashioning, the need for positioning itself. Again, I'm showing you a book of another book of Jacob Burckhardt, which is the civilization on Renaissance in Italy. And then you have another book, Myth of Renaissance and Individualism. So you have a lot of literature coming up this particular period. And this is a portrait of Reformation, where you find people going against the church. And in some cases, in places like Italy and Germany, you have people pulling down the Catholic churches. Okay, so need for secularism had to come up. A need for religious tolerance had to come up. Okay, and here again you have some kind of a debate going on, which is connected to the Reformation period, where people are discussing about the church, evil practices in church, etc. So I have shown you, to the maximum extent possible, some of the slides which are connected to the Renaissance and Reformation period. So the Reformation period was spread all over Europe, while the Renaissance movement changed the way man was thinking in connection with society and social practices. Reformation led to the way in which man had to practice religion and religious practices, and church, attendance of church, and all such aspects of the need of following a religion were explained during the Reformation movement. We will be talking about Renaissance and Reformation in reference when we are moving ahead, especially when we are talking of French Revolution and other revolutions which rocked Europe after the 16th and 17th centuries. The point here that we have to understand is that these ideas had a telling impact on the way European mind started thinking. And this is what we are going to examine, we are going to understand when we are trying to understand the modern European history. Thank you. And we will take up next topic in the next class. Thank you.